The hospital always seemed to breathe differently in the early morning hours, before the real flood of patients arrived. The hallways hummed with the faint buzz of fluorescent lights, machines clicking in steady rhythms, and the muffled sound of carts being rolled into place. For me, those first few hours of a shift were usually the calmest. Time to review charts, prep medications, and brace myself for the whirlwind that inevitably followed. That morning, though, I woke with a knot already settled deep in my stomach. I'd worked 3 consecutive 12-hour shifts, and this was supposed to be my 4th. My legs felt heavy, my eyes gritty, and my back still ached from repositioning a patient with a fractured pelvis late the night before. I told myself I'd push through. After all, nursing wasn't a career for people who wanted comfort. But something about the way the day started felt off. The first sign came when I walked onto the unit. Dr. Landon was already there. Normally he arrived later, sauntering in with his coffee cup, white coat swinging behind him like a cape. But today he was at the central desk before any of us had even clocked in, his brow furrowed, flipping impatiently through a stack of charts. "Morning," I said carefully, placing my bag into my locker and smoothing my scrub top. He looked up at me over the rims of his glasses, his sharp blue eyes scanning me as though I were already guilty of something. "Morning," he replied flatly, before snapping his gaze back down to the paperwork. I should have taken that as a warning, but I had patients to tend to. I grabbed the vitals machine and started with Mr. Higgins in room 12, a sweet older gentleman recovering from pneumonia. I checked his oxygen saturation, blood pressure, temperature, and wrote them down neatly on the chart. I even double-checked the oxygen flow. Last week, a new nurse had left his cannula kinked, and Dr. Landon had nearly exploded about it. When I returned to the desk, I caught Dr. Landon watching me. "Where were you?" he asked abruptly. I blinked. "Checking vitals on room 12. He flipped open Mr. Higgins's chart, scanned it, then jabbed a finger at my entry. "You wrote his blood pressure as 128/84. Did you even listen properly?" "Yes, I began, but he cut me off. "He's been trending higher than that for 3 days. Do you think suddenly, magically, his pressure normalizes? You think medicine works like a fairy tale?" His voice was clipped, sharp enough that 2 other nurses at the desk looked up. I felt my face heat. I double-checked it. It was 128/84. He exhaled sharply through his nose, muttering something under his breath about sloppy charting before slamming the chart shut. "Fine. But if cardiology rounds on him and sees that number, it's on you." The sting of humiliation burned worse than any exhaustion I'd carried into the shift. I wanted to defend myself, to remind him that vitals fluctuate, that I'd been trained thoroughly and trusted my own measurements. But I swallowed the words. Talking back would only make it worse. Instead, I moved on to my next patient, though the echo of his voice trailed after me. By mid-morning, the unit grew louder. Phones rang, call lights buzzed. Family members hovered in the hallways asking questions we didn't always have the time or answers for. I busied myself with medication passes, carefully scanning barcodes, verifying doses, explaining each pill to the patients who liked to know every detail. But I could feel Dr. Landon's presence like a shadow. He strode up and down the hall, his white coat flaring, his tone curt when he asked questions. Each time he glanced my way, my chest tightened, waiting for the next strike. It didn't take long. I was at Mrs. Walters's bedside, gently coaxing her to take her morning meds. She was 82, stubborn as a mule, and preferred to chew pills she should have swallowed whole. I'd managed to get 3 down when Dr. Landon swept into the room without knocking. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice slicing through the fragile calm. I straightened, startled. "Just administering her morning meds. Do you realize she has a swallowing difficulty?" Crushing her pills is contraindicated for at least 2 of those medications. He turned to glare at me, his expression thunderous. Do you want to cause an esophageal obstruction? Or maybe aspiration pneumonia? Is that the level of care you're providing here? Mrs. Walters looked between us, wide-eyed, clearly alarmed by his tone. I didn't crush them, I said quickly, my hands trembling as I gestured to the cup of whole pills on the tray. She chewed them herself. I was trying to get her to swallow the last one whole, like you ordered. For a moment, he just stared, his jaw clenched, his nostrils flaring. Then, without another word, he spun on his heel and left the room. I exhaled shakily, turning back to Mrs. Walters, who was frowning now. Don't let him talk to you like that, dear, she said softly, patting my hand. I know you're just trying to help. Her kindness nearly undid me. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, and helped her wash down the last pill with a sip of water. By the time I returned to the desk, my nerves felt frayed. I wanted to disappear, to crawl into the supply closet and scream. Instead, I pulled another chart, forced myself to focus. But the truth was undeniable. It wasn't even noon, and I'd already been told off twice. By noon, the unit had shed whatever scraps of calm it had clung to that morning. The corridors teemed with residents trailing clipboards, techs rushing for lab pickups, and orderlies steering patients to imaging. The intercom seemed to buzz every few minutes with calls for rapid response or code team standbys. I'd managed to sneak a sip of lukewarm coffee, though it did little to sharpen the fog in my head. My thoughts kept circling the same 2 humiliations, the blood pressure scolding and the scene in Mrs. Walters's room. Each time I replayed them, I imagined how the other nurses must have seen me. Incompetent, sloppy, a weak link on the team. Carla leaned over as she prepped IV tubing at the desk. Don't let Landon get to you, she whispered. He's been in one of his moods all week. He went off on Jacob yesterday for mispronouncing a medication name. I tried to smile, grateful for the solidarity, but the knot in my stomach remained. Yeah, I murmured. Guess it's just my turn. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about his mood. He seemed to single me out with a precision that felt deliberate. The next confrontation came not long after. I was covering Mr. Patel's room, post-op, still shaky but stable, when his daughter cornered me in the hall. She had a list of questions scribbled on a notepad, everything from his dietary restrictions to his follow-up appointments. I answered each as thoroughly as I could, flipping through his chart and explaining in layman's terms. That's when Dr. Landon appeared, striding toward us with his usual clipped steps. What's going on here? His gaze swept from me to the daughter, sharp as a scalpel. She was just explaining, the daughter began, but he cut her off. You are not authorized to discuss post-op plans with family members, he snapped at me, his voice carrying down the hallway. Heads turned. That is my role. Do you want to confuse them with your half-knowledge and guesses? I felt my cheeks burn as though I'd been slapped. I wasn't guessing, I said quietly. I was reviewing the chart. His expression darkened. And if you misinterpreted it? If you overstepped your scope of practice? You're here to monitor vitals, administer medications, and follow orders. Not to play doctor. The daughter looked stricken, clutching her notepad to her chest. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. This isn't about you, he said brusquely, then gestured toward Mr. Patel's room. Go wait with your father. I'll be in shortly. She hesitated, glancing at me apologetically, before disappearing into the room. I stood frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears. Around us, nurses pretended not to stare, though I could feel their eyes. The humiliation spread through me like wildfire. Next time, Dr. Landon said, his voice dropping just low enough for only me to hear. Stay in your lane. Then he turned, coat flaring, and disappeared into the room, the words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Stay in your lane. as if all the years of training, all the double shifts and sacrifices meant nothing more than pushing buttons and carrying out commands. I forced myself to move, to pick up another chart, to carry on. But inside, the sting lingered. A bruise pressed against my ribs. By mid-afternoon, the exhaustion set in heavier. The halls smelled faintly of antiseptic and burnt coffee. Alarms chirped from monitors, and I caught myself rubbing my temples more than once. I reminded myself, only a few more hours. Just keep your head down. Avoid him. Get through it. But avoiding him was impossible. At 3:15, an urgent page came through. Room 14, Mr. Diaz, had gone into atrial fibrillation. I hurried down the hall, adrenaline clearing the fog. We stabilized him with intravenous medication, and I set up the crash cart just in case. My hands moved quickly, efficiently, the way training had drilled into me. For a brief moment I felt steady again, competent, useful, part of the team. Then Dr. Landon burst into the room. "Why is the cart open?" he barked. I froze, mid-task. I was preparing in case he decompensated. His rate was 160. That doesn't mean you prep for a full code before I even arrive. His voice thundered across the small room. You think you know better than me? You think you get to decide when to initiate protocols? I opened my mouth to explain, but he didn't give me the chance. This is reckless, he snapped, snatching a syringe from the cart. Reckless and amateur. The tech standing beside me shifted uncomfortably. Carla shot me a sympathetic look over the patient's bed, but no one dared intervene. The room seemed to shrink, every sound amplified. The beeping monitor, Mr. Diaz's shallow breaths, my own heartbeat pounding like a drum. I forced myself to step back, to let him take over, even though every fiber of me wanted to scream that I'd done nothing wrong. I'd followed protocol. I'd prepared to save a man's life, but all he saw was a target. When the episode passed and Mr. Diaz stabilized, Dr. Landon didn't even look at me. He charted quickly, barked a few orders, and stormed out of the room. I stood there, my hands trembling so badly I had to clench them into fists. 3 times in one day. 3 public humiliations, each sharper than the last. And the day wasn't over yet. By the time the clock edged past 4, my body felt like it was made of lead. Every muscle ached from hours of standing, rushing, bending, and lifting. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten more than a protein bar since sunrise. But there wasn't time to sit, let alone breathe. The unit was chaos again, discharges overlapping with new admissions, phones ringing incessantly, family members demanding updates. I moved from one patient to the next like a machine, focusing on vitals, medications, and documentation, doing everything I could to block out the memory of Dr. Landon's voice tearing me apart in front of everyone. But even in silence, his words lingered. Stay in your lane. Reckless and amateur. Sloppy charting. They clung to me like burrs I couldn't shake off. At 4:30, I received an order to prep Ms. Carter in room 16 for a CT scan. She was a frail woman with advanced COPD, already on supplemental oxygen. I gathered her chart, checked her ID band, and carefully switched her to a portable tank. As I adjusted the tubing, she reached for my hand, her voice a whisper through cracked lips. Don't let them rush me. Please, I squeezed her hand gently. I won't. We'll take it slow. I thought I'd done everything right. Triple-checked the tubing, ensured the flow was steady, but in my haste to meet transport on time, I forgot to document the oxygen tank switch immediately in her chart. It was a small oversight, one I meant to correct as soon as she was safely on her way. Of course, that was the moment Dr. Landon appeared again. What's going on here? His eyes flicked to the transport aide, then to me. Preparing Ms. Carter for CT, I said carefully. He flipped open her chart, scanned the notes, and then his gaze snapped back to me. Where is the documentation for the oxygen switch? My stomach dropped. I just made the switch. I was about to enter it. About to? His voice rose, slicing through the hallway noise. Do you realize how dangerous that is? If she codes in the scanner and respiratory doesn't know what tank she's on, you've compromised her care. That's negligence, nurse. The word hit me like a slap. Negligence. I wasn't finished documenting, I said, my voice thin. I wanted to make sure she was stable first. Stable? He scoffed. Documentation comes first. Always. What you've done here is sloppy and unacceptable. The transport aide shifted awkwardly, eyes downcast. Ms. Carter's thin fingers trembled against the bedrail. I wanted to vanish, to crawl under the floor and disappear. I'll fix it now, I said, but the words sounded pathetic even to my own ears. Fix it? He leaned closer, his glare searing. This isn't about fixing. This is about professionalism. If you can't handle basic responsibilities, maybe you're in the wrong field. The hallway had gone quiet. Every nurse at the desk, every aide moving by, every tech with a chart in hand, they were all listening. The humiliation burned hotter than fire. I understand, I whispered, unable to meet his gaze. He exhaled sharply, snapped the chart shut, and gestured to the aide. Take her to CT. I'll follow up myself. As he stalked away, I stood frozen, my hands shaking, my throat thick with unshed tears. The word negligence replayed in my head like a cruel refrain. I thought of how many times I'd stayed late, skipped meals, taken on extra patients just to make sure no one went without care. And now, in a single moment, I was branded as though I'd put a life at risk. Carla sidled up beside me once the hallway cleared. She placed a hand on my arm. Hey, she murmured. Don't listen to him. You're one of the best on this floor. We all know it. I nodded weakly, grateful, but the words barely penetrated. Deep down, I knew the damage had been done. By 5:30, I was running on fumes, still replaying the confrontation over and over. Every task felt heavier, every step harder. When I finally collapsed into the break room chair for 5 stolen minutes, I stared at the floor, wondering how much longer I could take days like this. One day? Maybe. But 4 shifts in a row? Dozens more ahead? The thought made my chest ache. The hallway had gone quiet. Every nurse at the desk, every aide moving by, every tech with a chart in hand, they were all listening. The humiliation burned hotter than fire. I understand, I whispered, unable to meet his gaze. He exhaled sharply, snapped the chart shut, and gestured to the aide. Take her to CT. I'll follow up myself. As he stalked away, I stood frozen, my hands shaking, my throat thick with unshed tears. The word negligence replayed in my head like a cruel refrain. I thought of how many times I'd stayed late, skipped meals, taken on extra patients just to make sure no one went without care. And now, in a single moment, I was branded as though I'd put a life at risk. Carla sidled up beside me once the hallway cleared. She placed a hand on my arm. Hey, she murmured. Don't listen to him. You're one of the best on this floor. We all know it. I nodded weakly, grateful, but the words barely penetrated. Deep down, I knew the damage had been done. By 5:30, I was running on fumes, still replaying the confrontation over and over. Every task felt heavier, every step harder. When I finally collapsed into the break room chair for 5 stolen minutes, I stared at the floor, wondering how much longer I could take days like this. One day? Maybe. But 4 shifts in a row? Dozens more ahead? The thought made my chest ache. I loved nursing. I loved the patients, the science, the chance to make a difference. But under Dr. Landon's constant barrage, I felt like a failure, no matter how hard I tried. And the day wasn't even done. By the time the evening shift rolled in at 7, my body felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. Every step I took down the hallway dragged like I was walking through mud. The charting backlog stared at me from the screen like an endless accusation, and I sat there, typing with stiff fingers, praying my mind would hold together long enough to finish. The unit hummed with the change of shift, voices overlapping as night nurses got report, machines beeping in the background, the faint smell of antiseptic mixing with the dinner trays that had already gone cold. It was all so familiar, yet tonight it felt foreign, like I was drifting outside of my own body. When I finally logged off and tucked my badge into my pocket, the exhaustion came crashing down. But worse than the physical fatigue was the heaviness in my chest, the weight of Dr. Landon's words echoing all day. Reckless and amateur. Sloppy and unacceptable. Maybe you're in the wrong field. I knew I wasn't perfect. No nurse was. Mistakes happened, oversights happened, because we weren't machines. We were human beings juggling more than anyone should have to. But he hadn't left room for humanity. To him, I was incompetent. Disposable. The locker room was nearly empty when I pushed open the door. I sat down heavily on the bench, untying my shoes with trembling fingers. My reflection in the narrow mirror looked pale, drained, eyes rimmed red. For a moment, I didn't even recognize the woman staring back. I thought of the patients I'd cared for that day. Mr. Lawson's bleeding scare, the fragile woman wheeled to CT, the dozens of tasks that had filled every minute. They weren't thinking of my charting slip or the tone in my voice. They were thinking of whether someone was there for them, whether they were safe. And I was there. Through the chaos, the exhaustion, the humiliation, I had still been there. That mattered, didn't it? But his voice crept back in, making me doubt it all over again. As I changed into my street clothes, Carla came in, her bag slung over one shoulder. She smiled at me tiredly. "Rough one, huh?" I gave a humorless laugh. "That obvious?" She sat beside me. "He's hard on everyone, but he seems to single you out more. Don't let him crush you, okay? You're good. Better than good. Patients notice, staff notice. Even if he doesn't," I swallowed past the lump in my throat. "It doesn't feel like it." "Not today," Carla nudged me with her shoulder. "That's one day. Tomorrow will be another. Don't let one man make you question why you're here." Her words lingered with me as I walked out into the cool night air. The hospital loomed behind me, windows glowing like watchful eyes, but I focused on the horizon, the faint streaks of orange still clinging to the sky. The drive home was quiet, radio off, my thoughts circling endlessly. I replayed every encounter with Dr. Landon like a cruel highlight reel, wishing I'd said something stronger, wishing I hadn't crumbled under his glare. But then I remembered the moments that mattered. The patient who thanked me for holding his hand during a painful procedure. The smile from a family member when I explained a discharge plan clearly. The fragile voice that said, "Don't let them rush me." Those moments were why I became a nurse. Not for approval from one impossible doctor, but for the people who depended on me when they were at their most vulnerable. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt drained but steadier. My house was dark, silent, a sanctuary from the chaos of the day. I dropped my bag by the door and sank onto the couch, too tired even to eat. The day had left scars, no doubt. His words would echo for a long time. But deep inside, under the exhaustion and humiliation, was something harder to break. A quiet resolve. I would be back tomorrow, and the day after. Because no matter what he thought of me, I knew why I was there. Not for him. For them. And that was enough.